Hello there. It's your humble Ronin here with another special edition of Lounge Ronin Live, all things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please hello there. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss Charlie Kirk has been assassinated. And the first quote that came to my mind about this whole horrific and tragic event, which should never have occurred to begin with, your life should never be taken from you due to your ability to speak on what you believe. It's not a healthy lifestyle for us. And regardless of what he may have said and things like that, no one should have to go through what he had to, especially with his wife and children there to witness this. But I'm not here to talk. I'm not here to politicize this situation. I just want to talk about the incident, my thoughts, my theories, my speculations, and what this means for the larger world. But before we get into it, I want to get it out of the way that this is not something that should have ever happened. The only way you win a war of belief is through words, not through actions. And these actions are not representative of what it means to be an American, but furthermore, what it means to be a human. And Charlie Kirk did not deserve this. His family did not deserve this. So I just want to get that out of the way so we can move forward with the conversation and talk about what kind of led to this and what does this mean. So as you can see in the thumbnail, the first kind of quote that kind of came to my mind as I've been kind of processing this is from in the world that we're kind of living in the climate. Charlie Kirk has died as a hero. And despite what his rhetoric and his ideology and his belief system, he is viewed as a hero right now to certain political party and influencers and fan base and what have you. But eventually, he would have been turned into a villain because somebody would have been strong enough to challenge his ideology and belief system and his train of thought, and it would have cost him his credibility in the stage. And that would have been a more appropriate manner for people who wanted to face Charlie Kirk, who was a highly intelligent person. You should have beaten him with words and not with a bullet. But Charlie Kirk has been someone who has said a lot of inflammatory comments and rhetoric, some of which not really backed by any real data or any real substance of value. And we live in a climate now where unfortunately it's FOA, you F around and find out. And we as Americans, we have the luxury of being able to speak our minds regardless of the consequences that may happen. That is something that we as individuals have to live with. is the consequences of our words and our actions. Um, and I don't know if Charlie Kirk was well aware of that in terms of what he was speaking and saying, the consequences of his words. And I don't even think that, as we learn more and more about this, I don't even think this had anything to do with his political beliefs, his social beliefs, his religious beliefs. It just doesn't seem like that. I think that this situation paints a larger picture of how our society can be easily manipulated into inflaming various types of rhetoric and energy that then leads to situations like this. Now, what I mean by that is, like, we live in a climate now where most people live in the false reality. And if you listen to my motivational podcast, the Monday Mindset, then you'll understand what I mean by living in this false reality. And this false reality is a world that is created and propagandized for us. It's curated to make us feel and think and react in a certain way. It domesticates our individuality into complacency, into a hive mentality. And that hive mentality spreads into social and political dynamics and parties and groups and clubs and get-togethers and gangs and whatever, cults. And that is what you've been seeing here. Hey, shout out to Jack Reeves, Hotep. And that is what you're seeing here. To the point where people are not even acknowledging the death of Charlie Kirk. They're acknowledging their political, social, and ideological beliefs rather than acknowledging the human. And that's something that has been curated and fermented in our culture. We have been domesticated to think and behave like that. And not all of us. Shout out to the Hoteps. We are individuals within a community of like-minded people, but not everyone is like that. And you have people that are caught up in this hive mentality who have been domesticated into believing a certain way, into viewing the world in a certain way, into viewing people in a certain way. And then you have powerful entities who use that to foment division, to create policies, to divide us, because the last thing they would need is all of us to be united on our commonality rather than on our ideology and beliefs. And Charlie Kirk is someone who, he said a lot of things that many people would blatantly disagree with, and there's enough of a pushback that you could make the case that many things that he was saying were not necessarily the case. But at the exact same time, that doesn't mean that his life deserved to be taken. But we now we're living back in an era now where your freedom of thought and expression can threaten your life solely based on the fact that we are being domesticated into wanting to hurt people solely based on their ideology. I mean, I was recently talking to a girl who said, she wouldn't talk to a guy if he, voted for Trump. And it's like, there used to be a time in our world where you could fall in love and start a family with someone from the opposite political spectrum and you would still be happy. Together in the commonality of the love for one another, despite certain things that you don't believe or agree with. But over time, you make concessions and you adapt and you change and you grow. But we don't have that anymore. We don't look at people like that anymore. Everyone looks at everyone based on the their political, social beliefs rather than who they are as an individual. I mean, you can be someone who has pink hair and has some flamboyant ideology, but if you are someone who still has integrity and authenticity, despite some of those things, you're still a good person. But we don't live in that kind of climate anymore, where you're able to have these type of discussions because people have gone out of their way. Powerful people, influential people have been paid, sponsored, manipulated, blackmailed into making us want to hate each other. It's, I used to have this discussion with a friend, and I'd be like, I don't you hate a certain race of people so much, but you've seen them just as poor as your next door neighbor. So how can you tell me that they are living better off when they have entire cities and towns where they're just as poor as black and brown people? We're talking about white people. And she couldn't really make a case for why she thinks they're better off. And I'm like, well, think about that for a little bit. We tend to be our own worst enemies, especially when we let our belief system dictate our livelihood, our lived experience. And I think Charlie Kirk, in many ways, was a victim of that. He let his livelihood get the better of who he was as an individual. And, when you are someone who makes a career out of speaking, out of debating people, but oftentimes you're not doing it in good faith. I mean, there are consequences to that. And like I said earlier on, I don't think his death had anything to do with his belief system. I think they use that as a justification to further divide and exploit the trauma that people are kind of going through right now. With every single day, it's just one thing after the other, whether it could be a psychological attack on us, it could be Operation Gladio. I mean, take your pick. There are so many different ways that we are being conditioned and manipulated and domesticated into giving up our free will, giving up our individual rights, giving up our gun rights, giving up many of these things that make us American and make us comfortable in being able to live freely with a government that oversees us. And in closing on that part, I just want to say that, like I said, when you don't live when you don't live an authentic life, you end up becoming something that is a caricature. And that is something that I think for him and his legacy is that it's going to be a very muddied water, because what is his legacy really going to be? Most of the country is saddened by his death, but most of the country at the exact same time did not like his rhetoric. I don't know what that means for us as people, because, like I said, he did not lead in a manner and communicate with his community of the country in a way that made the dialogue feel like everyone was open and safe to really have genuine, authentic conversations. It's something that we have to really think about moving forward, about who we are as individuals. Now, when it comes to all the speculations and the conspiracies. I'm not going to pull up all the videos and do all of that. I want to keep this pretty short and concise and straight to the point for me. Right now, one of his closest friends, Candace Owen, there's this thing going on about a private jet that left an hour after the shooting, and then over the ocean, it turned off its radar for an hour and then turned it back on, and then flew back to the same airport. Who knows what that means? For all we know, that maybe the shooter was on there and they dumped him and the evidence off in the middle of the ocean. We like to talk about all those spy films and assassination films and movies, but where do they get the ideas from? There's video footage of what appeared to be someone running on top of the roof of one of the campus buildings where right after the shooting happened. You have conversations about supposedly him being fearful that he might be targeted due to looking into a certain Middle Eastern country, being careful. The longer they don't find the shooter, the more and more it looks professional. The more and more it looks like this had nothing to do with his ideological beliefs. You have the fact that there was several people who claimed to be the suspect but weren't. I don't believe that this had anything to do with his belief system and what he was talking about. He'd been talking like that for a long time. He'd been saying all sorts of crazy stuff. Never had any problems. Yeah, people were very confrontational with him, but never to the point where they had tried to attack him. So I don't believe that his death was based on what he believed. I think his death was used as a way to distract us and to further divide us, and maybe to send a message to other influencers on his side of the spectrum, and whatever criticisms and critiques that they may have been spouting, or any information that they have been given to that may jeopardize the intelligence agencies or America's interests in whatever. I just don't believe that his death was based on what he believed. I think it was a justification for something much, much larger, and we won't know until that plays out. They're making claims, which I think this is funny, right? So they don't have a shooter. Allegedly, they got a gun, right? But then they're saying that this was a foreign intelligence motivated attack. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, okay, so you don't have a shooter, you don't have a gun, but you suspect that this was from a foreign entity. All right, well, choose wisely who you're going to blame this on, because it wouldn't make much sense, but to blame it on Venezuela, because then most people are going to be like, well, why are you blaming Venezuela for the death of Charlie Kirk? Well, I mean, he's never complained about Venezuela in such a manner that they would deem necessary for them to take him out. But, we do have half of our fleet surrounding them. A convenient justification to go in there and steal most, all the lithium and oil reserves and what have you. So, I wouldn't advise using Venezuela as an excuse because most people are kind of pretty hip to the routine of American imperialism at this point in stage, or Western imperialism, I should really say. Wouldn't it be ideal to say Iran, since you've already kind of made a bunch of false flags in regards to Iran? So I don't know. It'd be a little weird for you to make the assumption that it was them. So I don't know. I don't know who they're going to try to pin this on. I don't know if someone made a mistake and the real truth would be revealed. But the point being, and all I'm trying to say here, is that his death was not based on what he believed in. Because if that were the case, the person who would have done it would be out here celebrating. There'd be a manifesto. There'd be all of this stuff. There is none of that. So, my point in coming on here was to just tell people to do not get caught up in the hullabaloo. Do not get caught up in the accusations of the political side that should be held responsible. Do not get caught up in any of that. If they, quote unquote, find the shooter, do not get caught up on their racial identity, their gender identity. Do not get caught up in all of that. That's all just another level of distraction and division for the people, and more of a way for them to strip away our rights. Wasn't it literally a couple weeks ago that they were thinking about stripping away gun rights from a certain gender community? Just be careful out there, everyone. Be careful of what you're ingesting in terms of information. Be careful of what they're trying to make you believe. And just be mindful of yourself. Be mindful of your humanity. Don't incite people. Don't instigate people right now. We don't know what type of mentality people are thinking in right now. And at the exact same time, let's keep in mind that most of the average people don't know who Charlie Kirk is, or didn't up until now. So what I'm trying to say is, like, his death wasn't based on what he believed in. It was used as a form of division and exploitation of the political climate right now in America. And because the American people have been sticking their noses and looking into things that they shouldn't have been to begin with. So just be mindful of that. Don't start blaming a political side for this death. Don't start putting the blame on a gender ideology. Don't start putting a blame on the race. It has nothing to do with any of that. That is all. That is just all to, like I said earlier, to domesticate us into a belief system and a hive mentality that allows them to further take away from our individuality. That's what all of this has been about. And it's just unfortunate that we live in a world where and I'll put it just how, like, Sam Tripoli likes to put it, the death cults are what run this world that we live in, and use dark energy and dark ether and dark actions and thoughts and motives to further erode our humanity, our authenticity. And that's something we should not forget. We should not make situations like this about our social and belief systems, because that is how they domesticate us into further making one another an enemy. And with that, this is just, like I said, this is just was one way to further distract the American people from looking into whatever. And also, the unfortunate irony of this whole situation, um, the fact that people are politicizing his death. They don't care about the innocent life that is lost. They only care about what they can do to use this to further fuel and push and monetize their belief and livelihood. And that's another unfortunate situation that we have to contend with. And then, we also have to keep in mind, like, it's hard to like look at this from like the political standpoint, because when I'm looking at this whole thing, I'm like, man, this whole thing has nothing to do with his beliefs on gays or black people or anything like that. So it's like hard to even talk about it from that angle, because it's just not that. And I could be completely wrong. I could be 110% wrong. On gays. But I don't think so. My guys just telling me that's not it. It just doesn't feel that way. I mean, with every single distraction and psyop and false flag and wag the dog, these grandiose cinematic events that they do on this on pretty much on a weekly basis. At this point, it's pretty telling to see the patterns and the mistakes and the hiccups. So I can't even address this in the way that maybe it would seem normal, but we don't live in a normal world anymore. So, as we begin, wrapping things up here, they, like I said, they will make him a hero. I don't know what that will do for the country. It's right now, what's the most telling thing right now is the fact that and it's just fascinating to me. I can't it's just so fascinating to me, this world that we're living in right now, this reality that they have curated for us. And I feel like I'm inside the video game, and I know that it's all just one big stage. And it's just disgusting to me that they use innocent life and they use divisive rhetoric and actions to just control people and subjugate us and break us. And maybe we can hope and hope that maybe they make a mistake with this, and it actually galvanizes people to put aside their issues and actually come together and address one another as humans. That's all we can kind of hope for, is that maybe people will reassess the way they interpret one another and we come to some sort of balance. I'm hoping. I'm trying to end this on a positive note. On a note that, like, we can feel that maybe, hopefully, that this was a mistake and they thought that they could use this to divide us, but it actually strengthened us, and we begin to make concessions and we begin to actually engage each other in a more humanistic approach rather than in a domesticated approach. So in closing, that's really what I hope for. I know that it's a hope that's filled with plenty of delusion, but sometimes that's how you overcome obstacles, is with a little bit of delusion. So we'll see how it all plays out. I want to thank everyone who's been here with me for the entire duration of this special breaking news episode. For those who are catching the replay, please let me know down in the comments your thoughts, feelings, speculations. If you've made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And I'll catch you all tomorrow, again around 12:30, and we'll continue the Whitney Webb series. Until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.